You got to be yourself. The only way to win in this thing is to be yourself. And so I think the fans are starting to reward those artists that have somehow stood in the breach and said, I'm just going to do my thing. You want to kill me, but I'm here for the music. There's something about that that's so powerful. It just trumps every fucking shitty intellectual argument, that NYU students made about music.
What's your favorite song of all time and why?
If you told me pick one song,
Yeah.
just pick one song, I think I would probably pick Strawberry Fields by the Beatles, because to me it's the penultimate single in that it's an amazing pop song. It's innovative.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real.
It satisfies this amazing balance that they can get sometimes, where it's high art and high pop.
Mm-hmm.
And I love pop and I love high art, but there's something about when you marry it, to me, that's always like where my sweet spot is. So if I had to pick one.
You could pick a backup as well.
No, I don't want to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
I'm all in. I'm all in on the song.
Well, that's a great answer. It's our first Strawberry Fields answer.
See,
do you feel something we still hear it today? In a comment, or have you worn it out?
It's one of those things where I've listened to certain songs like so many times,
Mm-hmm.
It almost becomes, as we say in wrestling, kabuki. It's like it becomes surreal in its. You have too much awareness.
Yes.
You're like, oh, the weird drum outro and the key change in the middle because they use different tape machines and different sessions, and it's like you become overly conscious. And you kind of start to lose the sort of the magical quality. But like a song like God Only Knows by the Beach Boys or something, you'll be somewhere, it's not something I would have on a playlist, and you'll hear it, and it's like, it just has a transportive kind of quality. He notably wrote it about a park, I think, where there was a mental institution. I'm not sure if I know this story well, but something about his mother and institution, and but even the lyrics are just so, I don't know, it's just one of those big phones, as we used to say back in the alternative radio days. Big phones.
And that's a great follow-up song, let's not call it a back song. Another great song to be mentioned. And I've found the same experience anytime I've ever covered a song. Not that it loses its magic, but
I've actually covered Strawberry Fields,
which is a huge task.
Very, very poorly.
Of course.
The thing about Lennon as a writer, if anybody's a songwriter, the thing about Lennon is really worth going out of your way to try to listen to his demos, because there's a little clue in there with all his demos, which is he's very rhythmic in the way he plays guitar, and I think I don't want to say it's symphonic, but it's almost like something about the rhythm of the way he plays his songs acoustically sort of reveals what he was hearing three-dimensionally to me. Mm-hmm. And, because the Beatles are what the Beatles are, the focus is usually on the melody and the lyrics and sort of the contrivance of the production. But in the foundation of it, almost all of Lennon's successful songs have these kind of like inner rhythms that are very unique to him, including the rhythms by which he sings. And so I feel I learned a lot just by picking up on that one clue. Because rock can be very kind of power chord, and it's basically the relationship between the drummer and the vocal or the bass, But there's something about this little stuff that he would do in there, I think, is really a secret sauce success thing for him.
So sort of like his strumming cadence connected to his presentation of
something. I find there's a causal connection there.
Yeah.
There are a couple kind of very rough home demos that he did of Strawberry Fields. Mm-hmm. Another song I would suggest going out of the way to hear is Harold Arlen, who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Wow.
Try to find his version of it, which is almost like more jazz standard. Same thing. You hear these like kind of inner rhythms and chord runs that are very. Best way I could say it is, the highest pop tends to not have a ton of information. It's almost like a beautiful Picasso when it's got the right amount of lines, and then that somehow it indicates a bigger picture. And so something about that, I hear it's like a line drawing. I see the whole picture in the line drawing, but I don't know how he does it because it's not. And I played it acoustic, and I didn't get that out of it. My version, I didn't think it was very good. And even when I played it live at my old tea house. People didn't even really react. It's just kind of like, it didn't mean anything because it didn't translate as either unique or in the lineage of that song. Excuse me.
I couldn't agree more, and you put it really well. When you were talking about, and this could be it, I don't want to keep pushing, but when you talk about that fine line between high art and pop, would you say that you feel satisfied? And you don't even have to answer, but that you've accomplished that in your career?
No, not as well as I would have liked. I think the funny thing about alternative rock, which didn't have, when we started, they didn't call it alternative rock. They didn't call it modern rock. They were trying all this stuff like postmodern and. MTV would occasionally float out these kind of buzzword phrases that didn't stick. No one really knew what to call it. Like post-punk, Is Susie and the Banshees post-punk? Kinda, not really.
Right.
So I guess what I'm after, and I'm trying not to belabor the point, is we kind of stumbled in our rejection of a lot of what was around us in the Midwest. Our love of what now would be called UK shoegaze music, because there was an aggression going on with the guitars, but it was more hazy. It wasn't Sabbath. And then our love of Sabbath and Rush and Zeppelin, we kind of put those pieces together. And when we first did it, everybody told us we were wrong, and it was almost like heretical to do what we were doing, including playing solos. So, like you do in life sometimes, you kind of stumble upon something, and it turned into a form of gold. So the language that we developed, along with other artists in their own way, is in its own way a chiaroscuro drawing of something more elaborate. Siamese Dream, with all its fuzz textural stuff and all its layering, it's still at the end of the day a chiaroscuro drawing when I'm really after really more of a symphony. And so I've always felt limited by our approach, but in the limitation and the frustration of the limitation, it pushed us to develop songs like 1979 or to go down these other divergent paths. But I don't think we've ever quite mastered the fine art of a Sisters of Mercy or Susie and the Banshees or The Cure, where you have a lot of space in your music, and through the space takes on a symphonic quality. That's really not been our gig. That's the kind of music I tend to like personally, but I've never been able to interpret it in a way that I felt comfortable that we were saying anything new. I mean, we could fake our way through it, but so no, I don't think we found that marriage between high art and high pop. We tend to be closer to the line than most artists of our generation, but I still think we've kind of struck out more than we've got it right.
Could you accept that a lot of people would disagree and think you did accomplish that?
Every generation has its bias isn't the right word. Like as I like to say, because sometimes it was more so back in the day, in the 90s, you'd hear like, you guys got a lot of 60s influence, and I was like, yeah, because I was born in fucking 1967.
Yeah. Right.
If you look up, actually, I could be wrong, but I think Strawberry Field came out February of 1967. I was born in March. So, and my father was a musician. So it's not too crazy to think that I'm in the back seat and he's listening to the song. Right. But that's the world that I enter into. The height of, I think maybe the song came out in 66, so maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, point is, I was born into that world. Donovan, the Beatles, Moody Blues, this kind of beautiful psychedelic world. So I think when you love something when you're young, and you in a way make music on some level in tribute to it, you never feel like you do it as good as they did it.
Of course.
But now that I've been around long enough, I certainly have gone back further where I realized that the Everly Brothers did this better than the Beatles, and the, whatever, you understand the analogy. Every generation has this kind of bias because of the way that you look through the telescope backwards. And there's, of course, a romanticism, You didn't hear all the gossip that people were hearing in 1967 about Paul's girlfriend or whatever. So it's not so much that I want to argue. I don't feel that way, but I can also respect that people who saw us in a generational way would see us in the way that I saw artists that I admire. But for me personally, I can't say that I got out of it what I wanted. And I think you can see indications of that. In fact, we talked about it openly at the time when we did Melancholy in 1995. We had a meeting in 1994. The album came out in 95. We had a meeting in 94 where it was like, I'm done with this idiom we're in. Like, I don't have anything else to say. And the band said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I either think we have to go completely down an experimental path, or we have to kind of make an album that's like the last thing we have to say in this idiom. And then everybody decided it was better to make one more album, guitar foundation. Right. But even on Melancholy, you can hear me trying to figure out, how do I get around the limitations of the guitar, which in many ways, me talking transparently about that through the years, put me, at odds with many of the guitar nerds in the world, because how dare you say the guitar isn't the be-all, end-all? And what I would say, if anybody's interested in that discursive and discourse, is my father was a guitar player. So I grew up around guitar playing. All I ever heard about was guitar. So I'm not saying, if you understand it in my parlance, it's the family business. So I felt I'd taken guitar about as far as I could take it. You know what I mean? And then when I would look around, I didn't really see many people outside of a few people like Kevin Shields or whatever, innovating in the space. And I would make a strong argument that if you follow my narrative thread, only in alternative music, metal has had a lot of innovation since, but in alternative music, the guitar really has not truly innovated much in the last 30 years in the alternative thing, which is why you see a lot of guys and girls who play okay. They're not like shredders like I was, and they get the right pedal and they go, and it's sort of got a thing. It's more almost like trying to play the guitar like a synth, but you're not playing guitar in the way that it was sort of meant to be, as far as I'm concerned, as a sort of multi-layered, multi-textural instrument that can simultaneously switch gears and modes. That type of guitar playing is an alternative, is basically fallen out of favor, and maybe we helped killed it, but
we're all helping kill.
So I'm going off on a long discursive thing, beautiful. But what I'm trying to say is, this isn't something I arrived at later in some sort of posthumous revelation. I was frustrated by 1994, saying I can't really get out of the compositional thing that I'm creating what I want. I don't want to say the band, but I'm in the band. I was frustrated with the band because we collectively couldn't seem to match the vision in my brain. And so that's why I think I'm critical about it, because I don't think I quite got there. And, you live it. There's time, economics, somebody in the band's mad because you're spending way too much time in the studio and they want to go, out to eat with their friends or whatever. It's like, that becomes an elemental thing. And like any trend, if grunge started, circa 89, 90, it had pretty much burned itself out by about 97. It's nice to see it kind of coming back now with younger bands. It feels fresh again to me when I hear it. But, you can see where my frustration that comes from, because I was like, we've stumbled on something very powerful. It's obviously working. People like what we're doing. But I know deep inside we're really not hitting this other level of communication.
Well, to be able to admit that, if, and I believe if you're being truthful, is a huge, maybe in some weird way that is the accomplishment. I haven't ever felt like I've written a perfect song or anything close to that.
Yeah, maybe that's it. There's a beautiful, I think it might be a Navajo tale. I learned it when I was very young, a Navajo myth, but the idea is it's a grandmother is, and again, if I'm saying it wrong, please, but I believe it's a Native American story. The idea is that the grandmother's making a rug or a shawl, and the little girl to the grandmother finds out that in their tradition, when the grandmother makes a perfect rug, she's going to die. So the little girl keeps going when the grandmother's not there and messing up the grandmother's thing. And the grandmother eventually says, you have to let this happen.
Right.
You know, like I've reached that point in life where it's time to make the perfect rug. And then it's time for me to get out of here. And that always stuck with me. I mean, I heard that when I was like 7 or 8, you know. So that's how I feel, you know, like there's something about being in connection with your imperfectness. That's not a bad thing, you know, because ultimately the arts is all about sort of an aspirational thing. First, it starts with hubris. I, or you, or we feel we can say something that a lot of people want to pay attention to. So that starts with an act of hubris or delusion. And then if you have talent, you're able to manifest it. And then you go into this world of like, okay, here's the product, not our word. And suddenly you're judged on a sort of timeline. And we've all experienced where albums and songs come out and 30 years later people are like, this shit's genius, what the fuck happened? And you read like people blasting, you know, the hell out of a record or a song that everyone considers suddenly a classic 30 years later. So even in the exchange of offering your art, however commercially minded it is, you still have to go through the process of a cultural sort of judgment that really doesn't have anything to do with what you've created. So it's a very messy process. And really, the best quote I ever heard is it takes 60 years, 3 generations, to truly evaluate the cultural impact of a piece of art.
Right.
So we're in the dark, basically. Not the worst thing. So if you're skilled, maybe in your fumbling around towards Valhalla, you actually sort of occasionally stumble across something that engages your curiosity and your ability, and through that you create these little diamonds that sort of last.
So I think the moral of the story is that it would be sad if you did finally reach.
Oh, I'm ready to die. Don't you worry about that.
Same here.
I'm ready to make my perfect rug.
I have a million questions, but I'll leave you at that.
No, I'm not in any hurry. You can ask me whatever you want.
Okay.
Don't feel like you got to rush away. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Cool. Here's something I've dealt with in my life, and I think maybe you have too. I've made some music that you know I didn't think much of either way that was wildly successful. I'm like, I didn't expect that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then like the follow-up pressure to that was not met with the kind of reviews like I thought. Like I really thought I was gonna get glowing reviews on this one record and this and that, and the opposite happened. And so I know you guys have been critically praised and probably have been also disappointed with some reviews, and I was wondering how you navigated that.
Well, honestly, most of our records from back in the day that are considered classics now were very poorly reviewed in their time. So you can imagine if the ones that were classics were poorly reviewed overall, the ones that people really didn't like, we got fucking killed. Most famously or infamously, when our 4th album came out, Adore, because to our conversation before, when we got to our 4th album, then I said to the band, okay, now we're making that experimental record that I talked about 2 years ago, which became this Adore album, which many people consider to be kind of a landmark of kind of presaging what's coming. Space, using acoustic instrumentation combined with the electronics. And there were some other records out at the time, but nobody really did it sort of in the pop rock alternative way. And people really do like that record now. And my good friend Neil Strauss, who's written many books, Neil did a profile of me for the New York Times, I think 6 weeks after the album came out. It wasn't selling. Melancholy was a huge, massive success. Ultimately, I think Adore went on to sort of sell about a quarter of the sales of the previous, which is total suicide. And it was a suicide record, and we can talk about that some other time. But point being is I do this interview with Neil. I know Neil personally a little bit at the time, and I know him certainly better now. But so that the piece comes out, as it does like a week later, and I open the New York Times and there's a graph. You know what I mean? And it's like Melancholy sales, Adore sales. you know, I'm being hung by the New York Times 6 weeks after an album comes out.
Right.
One single in, which was Ava Dor, which is also now considered a classic, at least with our fans. So, yeah, I mean, we got our asses kicked. And
did you take that stuff personal though? Were you hoping to open up Rolling Stone and see 5 out of 5 and stuff like this? Or
we never got that. You would be hard pressed to find a perfect review. I think the only perfect review I've ever seen on the Smashing Pumpkins was Pitchfork, as they do, will posthumously review a record, and they gave Siamese Dream a 10 out of 10, and which was funny because everything that they ever talked about regarding me in the post-2000 times was completely excoriating and making fun of me and calling me an idiot and all these types of things.
But did that stuff affect you at the time?
Are you talking about the 90s or in the 2000s?
Either. Good or bad.
Well, every decade had a different thing. You
Right.
see, in the 90s, I, of course, like any insecure Pisces, wanted to be loved and adored.
So when's your birthday?
March 17th. So, St. Patrick's Day.
My boys are Pisces.
Oh, very good.
They're almost 2.
So you
Pisces,
understand the jagged path that is the Pisces path. So, so there was this kind of begrudging respect that would kind of came when we achieved massive sales success.
Right.
In fact, Melancholy, and I say this with all respect because I really do admire the person I'm about to talk to, and he's actually playing with us tonight. You as well. I think 96 was like the crest moment of Melancholy madness, where we were selling crazy, and you know you were on every award show and all that shit that only happens every once in a while to American artists. And the fans, and this is Rolling Stone, but memory might be wrong, but I think fans voted Pumpkins Band of the Year. I mean, we were ridiculously massive at the moment.
Right.
Critics, Beck.
Right.
And again, I admire the heck out of Beck.
Yeah,
He's a
Beck's
super talented guy. Never had an issue with him. So it has nothing to do with Beck.
Of course.
But Beck was the type of guy, like other people in our generation, that would always seem to get the review of like, oh, you know, I stayed up all night and I listened to the album 10 times. And with us, it would be like snarky and talk about my appearance. And so as long as I was winning, I had some sort of inner mental calculation, which was like, well, they're wrong and I'm right. And here's the million people that are agreeing with me.
So do you think that winning felt even sweeter because it was...
Well, revenge is success is the greatest revenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what can somebody say, you know?
Right.
There's that famous thing like, somebody says to you, you sold out. And you go, yeah, I sold out the arena.
Yeah.
Right? So, just to belabor the point, post-2000s, then band's broken up, and I start into other projects. Jimmy and I had a band called Swan, then I did a solo record. Now you're not selling. Mm-hmm. Now you're in the weeds with everybody else in the music business. Of course, post-Napster, things were dissolving. So you don't have the sales, you don't have the commercial success. And then the press got even more vicious because it was like, now the knives were out. See, you're not so smart. And even when I would take credit for the things that I did in the Pumpkin success, people would insinuate that I was inflating my story and taking credit for things I didn't do. Mm-hmm. So now I'm dealing with like a mythological thing of like, so I don't even get credit for what I did right, and now you're beating the hell out of me just because you want to beat the hell out of me. So that part got really weird because I was like, is there a way out of this? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no.
Right.
No. The answer is no. America, I can't speak for every other culture. It's gotten better, but America in the world that I grew up in is a bullying culture. Mm-hmm. And they bullied the fuck out of me. And if you've ever been bullied, and most people have been bullied at some point in their life, it's that weird thing of like, do I fight back against the bully? And I talk to people in the business and lawyers, and they'd say, you just got to shut your mouth because they got the pen. You don't have the keyboard. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So if there's any silver lining, somewhere in there, circa, 2010, after about 20 years of this like almost constant toxicity, at least that's what it felt like to me. Maybe if I went back and read it all over again, I would be surprised that maybe there was more kindness in there, but I don't remember that.
Well, sometimes it's hard to see the kindness when there's that one comment or that one.
Well, I read a thing from, I believe it was Robert Mitchum, the great actor. He said something like, he never reads a review, and the person said, why? And he said, well, if it's critical, their words are just going to rattle in my head, and no good is good enough.
That's true.
Right? And we've all read that really good review, and there's the one thing there, like,
yes,
but his teeth are crooked,
Yeah.
So, and you're like, are my teeth crooked? No, actually they are.
Yeah, they are.
I wasn't really thinking about that until,
Yeah.
JoJo 42 said it.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to finish the little riff, I think almost like in the Tarot progression of the Fool, the hero's journey, I learned that everything I thought I would have gotten out of that dynamic, let's call it praise or respect or even belated faith, like when Pitchfork wrote the 10 out of 10 review on Siamese Dream, by that point in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. I felt like somebody who'd been killed and was a ghost, and I had really no emotional attachment to the conversation about me. It was kind of like, well, that's interesting, or well, that's kind of sad. I somehow I had emigrated from that zip code, and so I look back now, not fondly, because there were weird times where I really felt I had done the thing. Using Adore as an example, I made a classic record, but it just wasn't considered classic in its time. So it's weird to believe in something so much that you bleed for it, you do it, you commit to it. And I was also coming out of, my mother had died, Jimmy had left the band. So I'm in this weird period where I'm going through these intense internal things, mourning. I put it all into this record. I fucking roll the dice on the entire band's, status, and it blows up in her face. So now I go from, at the record company, I'm the fair-haired genius who's making them $1 zillion to now I'm an idiot. Things that they would approve in 8 seconds before, now I can't even get them to do anything. They basically dropped the record behind the scenes, like 3 months in. They basically told me, like, go away, disappear for a year, and then reemerge and go back to the guy that you were before.
Right.
And that's not how my brain works. So after that, we made a very weird record. Jimmy came back. We made a very weird record called Machina, which also now is considered a classic. But that thing confused the fuck out of fans. But I just want to go on and on and on about it. You already mean me. But I'm saying is, I'm trying to say something that's more allegorical than my own story, which is that if you let the adversity of the thing happen, if you let these things kind of spiritually kill you, you ultimately, I think, come to the realization that the thing that you're hoping for isn't real.
Right.
The thing that's real is your relationship to your friends, your family, your loved one, your partner, your band. Those are real things. Those are real people sitting in a room eating, Indian food together and telling jokes. That's real. The band in a rehearsal space is real. Us writing these great songs, some that we'll play tonight, that's real. I know that's real because I was fucking there. Everything else is like a weird fake daydream.
Yes, but if you take the macro view and you zoom out a little bit, we go full circle into you guys selling out the Forum. I know there's other bands playing, but you guys are as big as ever, and getting some of the critical acclaim that seemed deserved at the time that didn't happen, but it came later.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a full circle moment from my perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate
even
that.
in Chicago, seeing the adoration of the fans.
Oh, that was amazing.
And that's that. And then
we played together in Chicago for people.
And you guys sounded great. And I remember, if I could say, we don't have to use this, but you and I were talking, and you said we're playing the songs at the proper tempo. That's dope, because we all want to speed up and so like it's almost like maybe you settled in a little bit to just appreciate the moment, and it's okay.
I don't know. It's hard to remember what we were thinking back then all the time. I think, same tangent, you have to keep setting new goals for yourself. Of course. So if you're trying to be 25 when you're 57, that's a little queasy. You know what I mean?
It's weird.
Have you not learned something? Have you not graduated?
But it's still you.
No, I get
it's a
that.
Different version, and it's like
I really, Robert Smith is is a friend and
Great.
and one of my heroes, and somebody I've gone back to so many times, and one of the great writers of all time. Not just in all, like he's one of the great writers.
Right.
If you ever been to a show and Robert decides to play 12 singles in a row, you're like, holy shit, this guy he's the real deal. He is the real deal. And he lives it. He is that guy 24 hours a day. He's not a different person behind the scenes. And I really admire because he committed to something at such a young age, and he's never wavered. And it's so nice to see. They just had a #1 album in the UK. It's so nice to see them getting their let's call it their respect on every level of the business. And I hate to call it a business, but it is a business. Because the minute somebody gives you money, you're in business. Whether it's a friend, a fan, your mother, you know, we've all been in that situation. You know, somebody gives you $20, okay, now you got to clean your room, right? So we're in that indentured kind of space in the music business, and it is nice. And I think something's happening. I guess is the last point I would try to make. I think something's happening. The erosion of the gatekeepers in the last 10 to 15 years, when Pitchfork sold to Condé Nast, and they realized as a business model that snark was not a good business model, and suddenly they had to like act like adults. There's something that happens in the maturity of getting rid of the snarky gatekeeper class. I mean, they're still out there, but they don't have any influence. Getting rid of that class or having them marginalized where they belong, which is the jerk in the back of class, you know, throwing spitballs and telling silly jokes. That's basically what it is, against the level of effort that any musician at any level actually has to put in to perform and to contribute. And that's why I try to always give musicians their respect, even if I don't like what they do musically. It's like we're in this kind of brother sisterhood, that there's a level of dedication and focus. And the erosion of the gatekeepers, and I think The Cure in a way illustrates the picture very clearly now. The fans, and I even hate to use the word fan because it's always, you know, fan is fanatic, right? But the family of fans, for the first time maybe since way many years ago, their vote is the most powerful vote of all.
Yes.
I know there's a lot of contention about the business of streaming services, but the streaming services do illustrate people are listening to music when they want their thing. It's put radio stations under a certain challenge. So maybe there's a sort of a different honesty that's coming forward. And we've just lived, you know, not together, but in different quadrants through this transition from the old business, which was highly exploitative and really in many ways treated women very, very poorly, to this 20, 30 year transition to what it is, where, you know, a Chapel Roan can be put in that system, say, you know what, that's not me, come out, figure yourself out, and become a huge star overnight. Not overnight, but it looks that way. I just like where this is all going. Again, it's not a qualitative music argument. It's an argument that the concept of artist to consumer, artist to family of fans, now we're opening up into the sweet spot where, yes, there is a point to what I'm saying.
Of course.
Yes, we can enjoy that some gatekeeper who's, you know, I always call him the bearded guy from Brooklyn. You know, the bearded guy from Brooklyn finally decided I'm good, or we're good. Well, you know what? Number one, it's a little fucking late. Because your father or your grandfather, the other bearded guy from Brooklyn, they fucking hated us. But as their relevance has diminished in the culture that was set up by Rolling Stone and Spin and all that, that's all sort of ebbing away into something different. You see the real rise of bands as brands, and that's not a dirty way to look at it. What I like about what you do is you sound like you. I always say to young kids, because parents are always like, what's you know, everybody wants to be a star now. So 15-year-old kid, parent comes, what do I tell my kids? That you got to be yourself. The only way to win in this thing is to be yourself. And so I think the fans are starting to reward those artists that have somehow stood in the breach and said, I'm just going to do my thing. You want to kill me, but I'm here for the music. There's something about that that's so powerful. It just trumps every fucking shitty intellectual argument, you know, that NYU students make about music. Because somewhere in the pressure, the analogy comes to mind, there's that scene in the first Star Wars where they're trapped in the garbage disposal and the thing's coming like that. Okay, well, over here is the music business. which just looks at you as a commodity. And then over here is an audience who actually wants to understand, but they're not sitting there 24 hours a day worrying about your demo. You know, and somewhere in there you got to figure out how to escape and live to fight another day. And if you can, and you can sustain past that point, there's this sweet spot that happens. So to your point, yes, of course it feels good if the guy stops, or girl stops writing you about shit that they don't write other people about. One thing that comes to mind really quickly was when we put out Zeitgeist. Jimmy and I were the only members of the Pumpkins at the time. We put out Zeitgeist. The record company at the time, which was Warner Brothers, big label, they suggested doing this thing. Hey, everybody's doing this thing with different color covers. And, you know, over here, if you guys can add a song for Japan. And so we did 7 different color covers. It's not that we didn't know what it was, but people were like, no, fans love it. They like collecting it. What the fuck do we know, right? So we put it out. I mean, they beat the fuck out of us over alternate covers.
Yeah.
Okay, Taylor Swift, definitely the biggest pop artist in the world. Okay, you see Taylor Swift doing multiple covers. 2 years after we did the multiple covers, another famous alternative band, whose name I'll leave out of the conversation, they did the same thing, not a peep. So you realize there's this weird shifting value system depending on who does it, so somehow we're bad. Point I'm making and over-bloviating about is, if you can survive all that crap and get out the other side, what you saw and felt at the Aragon, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah.
That, to me, is here, and all that stuff. If you told me, I read 50 reviews on you guys today, and every review was glowing and amazing, I would still tell you it's here versus here. Because when I look, and Aragon is a very important building for me. I saw In Excess there, I saw the Bunnymen there, I saw the Cult there, I saw Jane's Addiction there, I saw the Ramones, I saw Iggy Pop, I saw Metallica, Slayer, Yngwie Malmsteen. I still have the sense memory, even though it's long ago, of being in high school and being, like, I was talking to Kiki from the Pumpkins, because she loves Metallica, and I said, I saw Metallica, and I was standing right there.
Yeah.
Ride the Lightning. And I've been on Lars's podcast, and we talked about me sitting right there, watching them play Ride the Lightning, you know, opening with, you know, Fight Fire with Fire, you know, it's like, that, that's what I'm saying. It's not advice, but it's more of a sort of admonition. It's like, don't lose that. Don't lose that, you know, the next you is there and there, and she's there and there. And it may not be music. It might be the person who solves cancer or, you know, fixes the world that's broken. It's not to be sort of Pollyannish. It's like, you know, if I, you know, I always hate this. If I can help one person, it was all worth it. No, fucking wasn't. Absolutely not. It's not worth it. It'll never be worth it. So if it's never going to be worth it, why persist? Because it's a faith that something about music is magical, and it's inexplicable as per its magic. You know, in the Bible it says in the beginning, you know, there was sound and light. Well, what is it's waves. What do we work in? We work in waves. We're just on a different level of the spectrum. So if you believe in that, well then everything else is just a human complication. You know, we've all sat there and watched a band. We like, you know, they used to be, and I like that one song. It's like, I've gone back to so many bands that I abandoned along the way, and I was like, oh, wrong. I was wrong. 18-year-old me was wrong. 25-year-old me was wrong. 35-year-old me was wrong. There's artists, no matter what they do, I listen to every record because they're right and I'm wrong.
Right.
They know something I don't know. So even if you loosely call yourself a fan of artist, and you're not willing to kind of go in the breach with them and give them a few shots, you're making a mistake because they know something that you don't know. You know, I always tell people like, I'm not an opera singer. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't see me baking, you know, great pizzas or anything. It's like, I don't have that skill set. I have one good skill set and it's all on display. I feel confident about that. And I feel confident in my ability to translate. But you know what? My wife's an amazing chef. I trust my wife is going to give me a meal that I'm like, oh, this is awesome. It's about being contributory is what I'm trying to say. It's not about, I'm on the stage and you're in the audience. It's like, no, this is my opportunity to contribute. And, you know, what most modern culture has been, at least in my lifetime, is you bring somebody a Christmas gift and they open it and they go, I don't want this, over their shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
I once had a psychic tell me, an artist makes silver apples. It's an interesting analogy.
Mm-hmm.
There's mythological things with silver apples that go back in time. Okay, an artist makes silver apples. And she said, you know what they do? They take a bite and they throw it over their shoulder and give me another apple.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, it kind of sucks when that happens. And she said, that's not your problem.
Mm-hmm.
Your problem is just to keep making silver apples.
Right.
You can't get caught up in whether they ate it or made a pie or, you know what I'm saying?
But you know how to make a silver apple.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll
see at Pumpkins. We have a greatest hits called Rotten Apples. See, we're good at making rotten apples. That's a good out. Thank you.
Run.